My name is Elena. For 14 years, I lived inside a mechanism of perfect precision. I didn't view my marriage to Arthur as a relationship so much as a synchronized movement, a series of gears turning in a grand, silent complication. Arthur was a horologist. A restorer of antique timepieces. He didn't just fix clocks, he breathed rhythm back into dead history. He was a man who understood the world through the lens of escapements, balance wheels, and tension. To Arthur, chaos was not a force of nature, it was simply a machine that had been poorly calibrated. And I suppose, in his eyes, I was the dial, the beautiful, serene face that hid the grinding machinery beneath. We lived in a townhouse in Beacon Hill, a structure of brick and ivy that felt less like a home and more like a vault. Arthur was consistent in a way that bordered on the geological. He woke at 6 a.m. The smell of his espresso filled the kitchen at 6:15. By 7:30, he was in his coat, heading to his atelier in the city center. He returned at 6 p.m. precisely. If the door opened at 6:01, I knew there had been a catastrophe with the transit system. We spent our evenings in the library. He would read technical journals or polish brass gears with a chamois cloth, his eye pressed against a jeweler's loupe. I would read, or catalog the acquisitions for the historical archives where I worked as a senior conservator. We spoke, certainly. We discussed the weather, the cost of heating oil, the provenance of a 17th-century manuscript I was restoring. But our words were like the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, rhythmic, necessary, and utterly devoid of blood. I was 40 years old, and I felt as though I had been preserved in amber. I was safe. I was respected. I was entirely, suffocatingly bored. I didn't realize that boredom, when compressed under 14 years of pressure, becomes a volatile substance. The disruption arrived on a Tuesday in November, carrying a camera bag and smelling of rain and ozone. His name was Silas. He wasn't a scholar or a historian, he was a storm chaser turned landscape photographer. He had come to the archives to look at old meteorological maps for a project on historical flood patterns. He walked into my temperature-controlled, dust-free preservation room like a sudden draft from an open window. He was everything Arthur was not. Arthur was polished brass, Silas was weathered driftwood. Arthur was stillness, Silas was kinetic energy. You treat these papers like they're holy, Silas said, watching me use tweezers to turn the page of a water-damaged logbook. His voice was rough, textured. They are, I replied, not looking up. They are the memory of the city. Memory is messy, he countered, leaning too close. You're trying to make it neat. You're trying to iron out the wrinkles. I looked up then. His eyes were gray and laughing. He looked at me not as a function, not as the conservator, or the wife, but as a woman standing in a sterile room, wearing gloves to keep her hands from touching life. I don't iron, I said, feeling a flush rise in my neck that had nothing to do with the room's humidity controls. I preserve. Same thing, he grinned. You're stopping the rot. But the rot is the interesting part, Elena. The rot is where the life is. That was the crack in the lens. Arthur saw me as a constant variable. Silas saw me as a mystery waiting to be solved. Our affair didn't begin with a touch, it began with a conversation that went deeper than the weather. We met for coffee to discuss the maps. Coffee turned to wine. The maps were forgotten. We talked about desire, about the fear of dying without having ever truly screamed, about the crushing weight of routine. I felt like a clock that had started to run backwards. The betrayal wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a gradual misalignment. I started lying. The lies were small at first, shavings of metal filed off the truth. A late meeting at the board. A traffic jam on the bridge. A sudden need to visit a supplier in the next state. Silas was intoxicating. He drove a beat-up Land Rover and took me to places Arthur would never go, wind-swept cliffs, abandoned factories, dive bars where the music thumped against my ribs. With Silas, I wasn't the archivist. I was raw. I was messy. I was alive. Leave him, Silas whispered one afternoon, the sheets tangled around our legs in a motel room that smelled of cheap lemon polish. Come chase the storms with me. I can't, I said, and I meant it. Arthur, he depends on me. Our life is a structure. You can't just walk away from a load-bearing wall. It's a cage, Elena, Silas said, stroking my hair. And the door is unlocked. You just have to push. I didn't push. Instead, I lived a double life. I became a master of compartmentalization. I would shower the scent of Silas off my skin and put on my pearls. I would sit at dinner with Arthur, discussing the restoration of a pendulum, while my mind was replaying the way Silas's hands felt on my waist. I thought I was clever. I thought Arthur, with his obsession for microscopic details, was blind to the macroscopic shift in his own home. I thought he was just a man of gears, incapable of sensing the ghost in the machine. I was wrong. I had forgotten the primary rule of horology: a clockmaker notices when a beat is skipped. He doesn't get angry at the clock. He simply observes the error, diagnoses the fault, and decides whether the mechanism is worth saving. The first sign that the ground was shifting came 3 months into the affair. I came home late, flushed from a weekend conference that had actually been 2 days in a cabin with Silas. Arthur was in the study. He wasn't working. He was sitting in his leather wingback chair, staring at the wall. "You're back," he said. His voice was flat, smooth as glass. "The seminars ran late," I lied, the falsehood slipping out with practiced ease. "And the train was delayed." Arthur turned his head slowly. He looked at me, his gaze lingering on my hands, my neck, my eyes. It wasn't a glare. It was an appraisal. "Time is a funny thing, Elena," he said softly. "It is the only resource that, once spent, can never be refunded. To waste it on fabrication, it seems like a poor investment." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I'm not following you, Arthur." "No," he said, standing up and extinguishing the lamp. "I suppose you aren't. I've been reviewing our portfolio. Looking for redundancies. Inefficiencies. Is there money trouble?" I asked, feigning concern. "Not for me," he said. He walked past me, and the air around him felt cold. "Dinner is in the oven. I've already eaten." That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing. It was steady, rhythmic, untroubled. I told myself I was paranoid. Arthur was just stressed. He was a creature of habit, he wouldn't know passion if it hit him in the face. I didn't know that he had already begun the dismantling. The end of my life as I knew it didn't come with a scream. It came with paperwork. It started with my job. I was the head of preservation at the Heritage Trust. Ideally, I was untouchable. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the director called me in. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "Budget cuts," he mumbled, shuffling papers. "The board has voted to restructure the department. We're outsourcing the archival work to a digital firm." "Outsourcing?" I stared at him. "You can't digitize the touch of vellum. You can't outsource what I do. It's out of my hands, Elena." The primary donor pulling the strings, they were adamant. "The position is terminated. Effective immediately." I packed my box in a daze. As I walked to the parking lot, I looked at the donor plaque on the wall. The distinct list of benefactors. And there, hidden under the umbrella of a shell corporation I barely recognized, Kronos Holdings. Arthur. I drove home, my hands shaking on the wheel. I would confront him. I would scream. But when I got to the house, the key didn't turn. I jiggled it. I pushed. The lock was solid. I rang the doorbell, panic rising in my throat like bile. The door opened. Arthur stood there. He was wearing his work apron, a jeweler's loop resting on his forehead. He looked at me with a mild, detached curiosity. "You're early," he said. "My key doesn't work. And I lost my job." "Arthur, what is going on?" "The locks have been retumbled," he said calmly. "Security upgrade. Let me in." "I'm afraid I can't do that. This is my house." I screamed. The veneer of civilization was cracking. "Technically," Arthur said, pulling a folded document from his apron pocket, "it belongs to the trust. The deed transfer you signed 6 months ago. For the tax benefits. You remember." I froze. The notary. The stack of papers he had slid across the breakfast table, smiling that rare, gentle smile. "Just a formality, darling. To protect our assets." "You stole my house," I whispered. "I secured my property," he corrected. "Just as I have secured the liquid assets. The joint accounts have been closed. The funds, my funds, derived from my labor, have been moved. You left me with nothing. I left you with exactly what you brought into this marriage lately, duplicity." He stepped out onto the porch and handed me a single key. It was a small, brass key, not for the front door, but for the padlock of the carriage house, the drafty, converted garage at the back of the property. "You have 30 days, Arthur said. I have arranged for the utilities to remain on in the carriage house for that duration. It is unfurnished, but dry. Consider it a grace period." "Arthur, please," I begged, the tears finally coming. "It was a mistake. I'll end it. I'll never see him again." Arthur looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the absolute, terrifying coldness of his soul. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed in the quality of the mechanism. "The spring is broken, Elena," he said softly. "You can't just bend it back. The tension is gone." He closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was louder than a gunshot. I called Silas. I had to. "He knows," I sobbed into the phone, standing in the cold, empty carriage house. "He took everything. Silas, you have to come get me." There was a pause on the line. A long, static-filled silence. "That's intense, Elena," Silas said. His voice sounded different. Distant. "He kicked you out. He took the money. The house. The job. I have nothing. But I have you. We can go. We can chase the storms." "Elena, look," Silas sighed. "The thing about storms, you chase them, you watch them break, and then you move on. You don't live inside them." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this was fun. It was beautiful. But I'm a guy living out of a van. I can't support a fugitive ex-wife." "That wasn't the deal." "The deal?" I whispered. "I loved you." "We loved the moment," he corrected. "Good luck, Elena." Click. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the carriage house. The silence was absolute. I had burned down my cathedral to warm my hands at a campfire, and now the fire was out, and the cathedral was locked against me. For 30 days, I lived like a ghost. I watched the main house from the small, grime-streaked window. I saw Arthur leave at 7:30 a.m. I saw him return at 6 p.m. I saw the lights in the library go on. I had no money. I sold my jewelry, the pieces he hadn't reclaimed, to buy ramen and cheap coffee. I applied for jobs, but the library world is small, and whispers travel fast. No one was hiring the woman who had been terminated for gross misconduct. I was being erased. Arthur wasn't just divorcing me, he was unmaking me. He was stripping away every layer of identity I had until there was nothing left but the raw, faulty core. On the 30th day, a courier arrived. I was packing my meager bag. I didn't know where I was going. A shelter, perhaps. Or a bus to a city where no one knew my name. The courier handed me a thick envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored stationery. Arthur's stationery. I sat on the edge of the cot I had been sleeping on and tore it open. Inside, there was a bank check. A deed. And a letter, written in Arthur's precise, copperplate handwriting. I looked at the check first. It was for half of our liquid assets. A significant fortune. Enough to start over anywhere in the world. Then I looked at the deed. It was for the townhouse. It had been transferred back into my name. Solely my name. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the paper. I unfolded the letter. Elena. Entropy is the natural state of the universe. Things fall apart. Gears wear down. Lubricants dry up. It takes force, constant, unyielding will, to maintain order. For 14 years, I provided that will. I built a world where you were safe, where time moved predictably. I believed that if I constructed the perfect enclosure, the mechanism inside would run forever. I was wrong. I failed to account for the human variable. The desire for chaos. I have spent the last 30 days dismantling you. I stripped away your comfort, your status, your security. I wanted you to see what the world looks like without the architecture I provided. I wanted you to feel the cold. But I am a restorer, Elena. I do not destroy things for sport. I take them apart to understand why they stopped working. I have realized that the flaw was not in the mechanism, but in the fit. We were incompatible gears grinding each other down. I am leaving. I have accepted a commission in Zurich. The house is yours. The money is yours. I have spoken to the board, your reputation is restored, and your position is waiting for you, should you choose to return. I give you back your life, not because you earned it, but because I refuse to be the reason for your ruin. That would be messy. And I detest a mess. You are free. The clock is reset. Do try to keep better time. Arthur. I walked out of the carriage house and across the lawn. The front door was unlocked. I walked into the hall. The house was silent. His coat was gone. His smell of espresso and metal polish was faint, fading already. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. He had won. If he had left me in the gutter, I could have hated him. I could have been the victim. I could have fueled myself on rage. But he hadn't. He had given me everything. He had proven, with mathematical precision, that he was the better person. The stronger man. The architect of my salvation as well as my destruction. I stood in the center of the beautiful, silent house that was now entirely mine. I had the money. I had the job. I had the freedom I had claimed to want. And I had never felt more completely, devastatingly empty. I looked at the clock face. It continued its perfect, relentless march forward, indifferent to the woman standing in the shadow, realizing that she was the only broken thing in a room full of masterpieces.